Okay, so we're going to start out by looking at kidney anatomy. We're just looking at what it looks like, macro and micro anatomy, and then we'll move on to physiology in a separate video. Here's a quick diagram of the body. You can see here is the sternum and xiphoid process. That's your chest plate, and the xiphoid process right here is the little bit that you can feel right at the edge. Here's your rib cage on either side, which means your kidneys are located directly beneath your rib cage, but behind your liver, so you wouldn't be able to feel them. They're just about pressed against your back. The two major vessels that you're looking at are your abdominal aorta, which is also called your descending aorta, and the other is your vena cava, your inferior vena cava that would be leading back up to the heart. And so you can go ahead and color those so that you remember which one is which. Your abdominal aorta is carrying oxygenated blood to the rest of the body, so color that red. And your inferior vena cava is returning deoxygenated blood back up to the heart. So not the prettiest colorings that I've ever done, but that's okay. And finally, the last piece that you need to know, these right here, are your hip bones. We'll keep it simple, just call them the hips. Okay, now looking at the kidneys, immediately above the kidney is your adrenal gland. So you can go ahead and color those in. I would color the kidney like a brown color, and your adrenal maybe orange. Here we go. And then the blood vessel leading to the kidney, that would be this, oops, sorry, that would be this right here, is going to be the renal artery, and the vessels carrying blood away from the kidneys back to the heart is going to be the renal vein. And then finally, the collecting tube that picks up all the urine and brings it down to the urinary bladder, which is down here, is going to be the ureter. And you've got one on either side. You can go ahead and color that in yellow. And then lastly, the tube that empties out the urinary bladder is called the urethra. Both males and females do have them, although in the males they extend down the length of the penis and are therefore much longer. So now we're looking at a cross-section of the kidney, and if we take a look, this here would be showing you the left kidney, where the ureter is heading towards the central line right here. Okay, you've got two blood vessels, one going in, those we've already taken a look at, and one going out, and then the ureter down here, which is the collecting tubule. So you can go ahead and label those and get them colored. So we can start with labeling the cross-section now of the kidney, and we'll start on the outside with the renal capsule, which is a thin covering that covers the whole kidney, obviously. And then between the renal capsule and the ureter, or the collecting area here, there's two major tissue areas, and they're going to be the renal cortex here on the outside, and the renal medulla on the inside. And what differentiates the cortex from the medulla is that the medulla is full of these big fan-shaped pieces here, and each one of those is going to be called a renal pyramid. And each renal pyramid kind of tapers down right in this area right here to form what is known as a renal papilla. So waste products are going to be filtered out of the blood up here in the pyramid, and then all that waste material goes through the papilla and into this huge opening right here. That's called the renal pelvis, and I don't have a separate line for it. And it's composed of two separate parts, what is known as the major calyx and the minor calyx. So sort of a brief overview of what's happening. We've got blood coming in via the renal artery. That's spreading out, breaking into smaller and smaller arterioles all throughout here that are each going to a separate renal pyramid. Each blood vessel then breaks further and further and further so that it can interact with the kidney tissue, and all of the waste material and extra water can be filtered out, pulled into first the minor and then the major calyx and the renal pelvis, and then excreted down the ureter. All the blood that is still good goes down the renal vein and returns back to the heart to be sent throughout the rest of the body. And now we can kind of zoom out and just look right here at this particular piece. So a typical renal pyramid. And it's going to be composed of all of these collecting ducts. Each collecting duct dumps into the papilla and then into the minor and the major calyx. So you've got the movement of blood, and I should mention right now that all throughout the renal cortex, there's just tons and tons of blood vessels, all kind of interdispersed throughout here. Little venules, little arterioles that are going to be heading back and forth from into the renal arteries and veins. And then all of this extra tissue here is sending waste product downwards to the renal pelvis to then be excreted out through the ureter. So what you're looking at here is probably the most complicated topic that we'll cover in all of IB higher level. And this is what's called a nephron. It is the functional unit of the kidney, and each nephron contains a whole swizzle of different tubules that are all having the purpose of exchanging different materials back and forth between the kidney tissue and the blood. So we'll start by looking at the kidney tissue part of all of this. So this all begins right here. We've got an exchange between the blood and the kidney tissue, and this kidney tissue kind of wraps around a big puff of a blood vessel. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We've got a whole bunch of tubules that go all over the place. Then you've got this long tubule that's going to dip down into the renal medulla, some more tubules, and finally this duct that we've already looked at. This is our collecting duct. So let's go ahead and start labeling it and figuring out what everything is doing and how it's working. We're going to start up here with the Bowman's capsule. The Bowman's capsule is what wraps around the blood vessel. Now, proximal is referring to something that is close, like close proximity. So all of, all of this right here is going to be called the proximal convoluted tubules. And then the nephron dips down, like I said, into the renal medulla. And this long piece here is referred to as the loop of Henle, which has two parts: the descending, which I didn't give you room to label, but this is the descending, and the ascending loop of Henle. And finally, we have another big convoluted area of tubules. Because it's further away, it's referred to as distal, meaning far away. So this up here is the distal convoluted tubules. And then the product of the distal convoluted tubules dumps into the collecting tubule here, or the collecting duct. And as you can see, there's going to be a whole bunch of different nephrons that are each dumping their contents into the collecting duct, which will then go down into the renal pelvis to be excreted. Okay. So now we can start looking at some of the blood part of the nephron, and that's going to start out with what's known as an afferent arteriole here. And the afferent arteriole then kind of bundles up into this thick conglomeration of different blood vessels kind of all coming together. There's some different properties there that we'll be looking at, but this chunk is what's known as a glomerulus. And then the blood coming out of the glomerulus starts interacting with the kidney tissue itself, and this is called efferent arteriole. And at this point, it's still oxygenated, and so we're going to color all of this in red. And notice there is a lot of interaction and looping around the loop of Henle, and so all of this, like I've mentioned, is going to allow for a really great exchange of different ions and different salts. All of this is 1 cell thick so that you can have that exchange happening relatively easier. And then eventually we swap back and start going up the other side of the loop of Henle with our little venule here. And this venule over here is going to lead to the renal vein. And one more piece that I didn't leave you room for, but all of this in terms of the blood vessels, where it's all looping around the loop of Henle, all of these blood vessels are referred to as peritubule capillaries, capillary network that goes around peri, the tube's tubular. And so at this point, if you really want to make sure that you know this, see if you can draw it. IB hopefully wouldn't make you draw this, but at the very least, you should be able to label all the parts. So even if you go back to the beginning of this section of the video and pause it and see what you can label, maybe kind of draw it by looking at a reference and then being able to label everything. But if you don't understand where all of these things go and how they intermingle, then you're really not going to be able to understand the physiology of all of this. So I want to show you just a couple pictures from a textbook that I have. I think they do a better job at showing you just how much interaction there is between the blood vessels and the nephron itself. So you can see here, let's see what we can trace over. So here would be the Bowman's capsule. Within that, the glomerulus. This would all be the proximal convoluted tubules. And so when it's drawn, it's much more simplified. But here you can just see how wonky they are. The loop of Henle descending and ascending, and then the distal convoluted tubules, again, having a lot of interaction with various arteries. And that you've got your collecting ducts. Hopefully everything here is starting to make a little bit of sense. And if we move down here, here's an actual micrograph of this seen under a scanning electron microscope. So what they've done is, I do believe, yeah, these would be all of the blood vessels. So they've taken the blood vessels, they've probably injected some type of plastic casting agent so that all that's left is the resin, and then they've gotten rid of all the actual tissue itself. But lots and lots of jumbled up blood vessels right here. So all of these would be the glomerulus, and so the afferent leading to the glomerulus, the efferent would then loop away towards the loop of Henle. And that's it for this section. We'll move on with physiology of the kidney and how osmoregulation works. Hopefully I'll be able to have that up for you here within the next couple of hours. Have a great day.